I still remember the exact moment my world tilted. The patient's eyes went wide, unblinking, and they whispered a name that wasn't theirs. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, twice, as if warning me, and the faint hum of the monitors began to warp into a low, throbbing vibration that rattled the floor beneath my feet. The air was thick, metallic, carrying the sharp tang of antiseptic, but beneath it, something fouler lingered, unplaceable, crawling under my skin. I reached out instinctively, but my fingers brushed only empty space. The shadow that passed behind the fourth stand was gone before I could confirm it. Yet the temperature in the room plummeted, and I felt a draft brushing the back of my neck, like fingertips grazing my spine. The patient's voice dropped to a rasp, a cadence that didn't belong to human speech. Each word reverberated through the sterile room, vibrating against the metal of the bed frame. I leaned closer, heart hammering, mind scrambling for rational explanations. Seizure, delirium, stress. But the pattern in their murmurs, looping, echoing, precise, did not match any neurological condition I'd studied. I noticed the monitors glitching. The EEG tracings warped into jagged, chaotic lines, spikes that no one should survive. A shadow pooled on the far wall, darker than darkness itself, stretching like it'd wait. Yet when I stepped toward it, the floor reflected nothing but my own shoes. Then, as if answering some silent signal, the light snapped out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the patient's eyes glimmered, pale, unearthly, unblinking. I froze, feeling the rhythm of my own breath collide with sound I couldn't place, a scraping, low and deliberate, like fingernails across glass. I took a cautious step back, gripping the edge of the bed, and realized I couldn't tell if the sound came from them or from somewhere else entirely. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning the mechanical hum of the monitors. I wanted to speak, to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. Something was there, something watching, and it wasn't supposed to exist. I leaned closer and the whispering intensified, but the words, horrifyingly, were my own name. I am a neurologist. I've spent years mapping the labyrinthine corridors of the human brain, tracing every neuron's fire, cataloging every twitch, seizure, and silent anomaly. My days are spent in fluorescent-lit rooms, surrounded by the sterile hum of monitors and the faint, lingering scent of antiseptic. It's a world of patterns, of cause and effect, of logic. And I've always believed that for every symptom, there's an answer, some rational explanation waiting in an MRI scan or a blood panel. That evening, I was alone in the neuro ward, reviewing patient charts in the dim glow of my desk lamp. Most of the hospital had emptied for the night. The echo of my footsteps against the linoleum felt louder than usual. I had a cup of lukewarm coffee beside me, its bitter smell mixing with the clinical tang of disinfectant. My hands hovered over the keyboard, cross-referencing EEG readings. When a new patient was wheeled in, a referral from the emergency department, flagged as urgent, unexplained neurological episodes. From a moment I saw them, something felt off. Not the usual red flags, no convulsions, no dramatic loss of consciousness, but a subtle, creeping dissonance. Their pulse was irregular, yet steady, their pupils dilated and contracted in a pattern that made no sense. And there was a faint, unplaceable chill in the air, brushing against my skin as if the room itself had exhaled. My professional instincts screamed caution, but I also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down. This was a patient I could not ignore, a brain in distress that might unravel if I hesitated. I thought about past cases, patients who arrived with symptoms no textbook could explain. I still remember the first time I felt that shadow crawl over my mind, though now I know it was never just a patient. That whisper, that chilling gaze, the sensation of something watching from just beyond comprehension. It followed me long after the ward fell silent. It lingers in quiet moments, in the corners of my vision, in the softened machines that should be innocuous. I thought I understood the human brain, its patterns, its chaos, its beauty, but I was naive. There are corners of perception no EEG can map, no textbook can explain, where fear and the inexplicable entwine. As a neurologist, I have always sought answers, patterns, causes, but some events resist logic. They are not errors, anomalies, or malfunctions. They exist in the liminal space between the tangible and the unfathomable, teasing the limits of understanding. That night, I realized that knowledge can be a double-edged scalpel. It cuts open the mind, exposing truths that the ordinary eye should never see. I have been trained to heal, to interpret, to make sense of neurons and networks. And yet, for all my expertise, I encountered something that not only defied explanation, but also refused to release me from its gaze. I cannot say whether what I experienced was supernatural, neurological, or some cruel convergence of both. But I do know this. The eyes that stared at me then were not entirely human, and the whispers I heard spoke to more than a patient's confusion. They spoke to fragility of my own perception, to the tenuous thread between sanity and oblivion. Every night since, I feel the weight of that presence, the echo of its intelligence brushing the edges of my mind. I often wonder if every shadow I pass, every flicker of movement I glimpse in a sterile corridor, carries fragments of the same unknown. If the veil between the real and the impossible is thinner than I ever imagined, then perhaps we are all susceptible, all vulnerable. And sometimes in the quiet hours, I swear I hear it whisper again, my name, precise, deliberate, and I remember that it has never truly left. One chilling truth remains. If it found me, a neurologist trained to dissect the mind, then no one is truly safe. The boundaries between professional detachment and personal fear blurred. I thought about past cases, the ones I had documented and rationalized, the ones I had lost sleep over. Could it be that some anomalies existed not merely in the body, but beyond it? I felt a creeping paranoia. If my science could not explain this, did that mean my understanding of reality itself was incomplete? I glanced at the EEG again. Jagged peaks, deep troughs, a pattern almost like a heartbeat, but not my patient's. Something else was pulsing, layered beneath the observable readings. I checked the patient's MRI scans again. Nothing abnormal. And yet, when I focused, I swore the images shifted subtly, fleeting traces of shapes that were not anatomy. Figures crouched in the brain's white matter, shadows folding in impossible angles. The fluorescent lights flickered, and with each flicker, the shadows in the corners seemed to lean closer, observing, calculating. I felt my rational mind fight against the irrational terror building in my chest. My own reflection in the monitor's glossy surface startled me. The face staring back was paler, eyes wider, an uncanny echo of my fear. Mini cliffhanger. A low scraping sound began to echo from the floor vents, rhythmic, deliberate, like something moving just beneath the hospital walls. I tried to calm myself, repeating the professional mantra. Everything has a cause. Everything can be measured. But even as I spoke it, the patient's whispers intensified, a layered chorus of voices I didn't recognize, some familiar, some alien. The monitor's hum joined the chorus, creating a discordant symphony that pressed against my skull. I felt my hands shake despite gripping the edge of the bed, my breath catching my throat as rationality slipped just slightly, just enough to let fear seep in. And then it happened. The patient's body twitched in a sequence I could not have predicted. Their head turned sharply, eyes locked on mine with an intelligence that was not theirs, and I realized this was no ordinary neurological anomaly. Something else was in the room, entwined with the patient, and it was aware of me. My mind raced, every learned instinct screaming at me to retreat, to call for help, but my professional obligation held me frozen in place. I leaned closer, compelled by both fear and responsibility, and in that instant, I saw it. Something in the corner, shifting, waiting, watching. But what I saw next still keeps me awake at night. I had never felt anything like it before. One moment, the patient lay quietly on the bed, pale and trembling, and the next, their body arched violently, spine contorting in ways that defied any anatomical logic I had studied in years of neurology. Their head snapped to the side, eyes wide and unblinking, pupils dilated to an unnatural blackness that reflected every flicker of the overhead lights. I froze, hand hovering over the bedside monitor, the plastic warmth of the railing under my fingers grounded me only slightly. A low, guttural vibration filled the room, emanating not from the patient, but from somewhere else entirely, the walls, the floor, the very air around me. My rational mind scrambled to label it. Seizure? Catatonia? Panic attack? Nothing fit. The EEG tracings behind me pulsed in chaotic spikes, yet the pattern wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost intelligent. Each surge synced with the patient's movement, as though some unseen conductor orchestrated their body from beyond comprehension. I reached for their arm, intending to stabilize them, but my hands passed through the air as if meeting resistance only my nerves could feel. Goosebumps rose along my arms. The faint metallic tang of blood, not from patient, filled my nostrils. I glanced down and saw nothing, yet the sensation persisted, crawling along the back of my throat. The monitors glitched violently, lights flickered, and for a moment, it began with a sudden silence. The monitors, which had been erratic moments before, went dead. Even the hum of the ventilation ceased, leaving the ward suspended in a vacuum of sound. I blinked, tried to recalibrate my senses, but the patient's eyes held me in a gaze that was no longer their own. They were black, infinite, reflecting every light in the room, yet revealing nothing, as if the very essence of life had retreated, leaving only a vessel behind. Then the air shifted, cold, heavy, viscous. It pressed down on my chest and stomach, making each breath a conscious labor. The metallic tang of blood intensified, yet when I searched the bed and floor, there was none. I staggered back, hand catching on the edge of the bedside table, and the patient's body moved, not in spasms or reflexes, but with deliberate intent, limbs bending at angles they should not. Their head turned slowly, almost in a deliberate arc, until their gaze locked with something in the far corner of the room. I followed it instinctively and saw it, the shadow, not a shadow cast by light, but living darkness, thick, impenetrable, pulsing with intent. My mind screamed rational explanations. Fatigue, stress, hypnagogic hallucination. But the air around it vibrated, low-frequency tremors tickling my bones. A sound began low at first, like distant chanting, then layered. Whispers and voices I recognized and others I could not comprehend, all overlapping in a chorus of dread. The monitors surged back to life, alarms blaring, but their readings made no sense. Heart rate spiking to impossible numbers, oxygen saturation fluctuating without cause, EEG tracings unraveling into chaotic, yet structured patterns, as if the brain itself was being manipulated from outside the body. I stumbled toward the machine, desperate to stabilize the patient, but the cords and electrodes felt alive, crawling over my hands with a faint, electric sting. A cold wind whipped through the ward, though all windows were closed. Papers lifted, swirling, and the scent of ozone and burning hair filled my nostrils. My own reflection in the monitors appeared fractured, twisted, as if I were a patient under observation by something beyond comprehension. Every instinct told me to flee, yet I remained, rooted by the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that abandoning a patient, even under inexplicable circumstances, was unforgivable. Then the patient spoke. Or rather, the voice emerged from them, layered and impossible, reverberating across the walls. It was my voice, and yet it was not. It spoke of things no one should know, secrets of the ward, whispered confessions from colleagues long gone. Each syllable carved into my chest, a cold, invasive force that bypassed sound and settled directly into my consciousness. Panic clawed at me. I covered my ears, screamed into the void, but the sound persisted, internalized, echoing in perfect synchronization with the flickering lights and pulsing shadows. My hands went to the bedside rail to steady myself, and the patient's fingers closed around my wrist. The pressure was precise, deliberate, as if gauging my resolve. Pain flared, but not purely physical. A sensation of my mind being prodded, memories rifled through, ethical doubts laid bare. I realized then that my own neurological expertise, the very knowledge I relied upon to diagnose and protect, had become a conduit. Something or someone was using it against me. The shadow in the corner expanded suddenly, stretching across the floor and walls, enveloping the room in darkness that was thicker than any absence of light. I tried to pull back, but the floor seemed to warp, tilting slightly, and I fell, not onto the tiles, but into a sensation of endless void, the weight of gravity replaced by vertigo. Time fractured. Seconds stretched, contracted, became unmeasurable. I caught glimpses of faces, past patients, colleagues, strangers, all twisted, distorted, watching, accusing. Each phase seemed to pulse in and out of existence, synchronized to the patient's rhythmic, unnatural breath. I tried to ground myself in medical procedure, to assess vital signs, stabilize, record. My instruments failed. Readings were nonsense, numbers looping, defying every law of biology I had learned. The patient's body convulsed, limbs bending impossibly, yet with a deliberate, intelligent rhythm. Their eyes, black and infinite, met mine once more, and I felt my own thoughts laid bare. I saw flashes of my failures, misdiagnoses, patients I couldn't save, ethical lines I had blurred. The shadow's presence felt intertwined with my own conscience, magnifying every professional doubt into a physical weight pressing on my shoulders. A final, impossible sound erupted, a chorus of whispers, screeches, and metallic screeches that seemed to emanate from the walls, floor, and even the patient's own body. I instinctively fell to my knees, covering my head, tasting the acrid tang of panic and ozone in my mouth. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound ceased. The monitors powered down again. The light steadied. The ward fell silent, save for my own ragged breathing. I opened my eyes slowly. The patient lay still, normal, alive. Their pupils returned to human size. The shadow was gone. The air smelled sterile once more, cold and clinical. And yet, something remained. A residual weight, an unseen gaze pressing down, a knowledge that the veil between the normal and the impossible had been breached, and that it had left a fragment behind in me. I stepped back, shaking, hands trembling as I realized. Nothing in neurology, medicine, or science could explain what just happened. I could document every vital, every measurement, every symptom, but none of it would convey the truth, because the horror I had witnessed was not confined to the patient. It lingered in the room, in the shadows, in my mind, and it was patient, deliberate, waiting. I turned to leave the ward, desperate for distance, and caught a flicker in the corner of my eye. The shadow, impossibly thin, stretching along the far wall, watching me. I blinked, gone, but I knew, with icy certainty, that it had not left. The war returned to its habitual hum, but I knew the illusion of normalcy was fragile. The monitors displayed standard readings. The patient's vitals were unremarkable. In theory, everything was fine. In practice, nothing was. I stared at the EEG tracings, now smooth and predictable, and felt the hollowness of comprehension. No explanation could reconcile the events I had witnessed with the neurology I had spent decades mastering. My instruments, my textbooks, my experience, all were inadequate in the face of what had happened. I documented every detail as best I could. The sudden contortions, the inexplicable EEG anomalies, the layered whispers, the black eyes, the shadow that had moved independently of light. Yet I knew any report I submitted would be dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations, overwork, or even a lapse in judgment. Colleagues might nod politely, jotting notes without ever comprehending the dread I carried. Science demanded reproducibility. Experience demanded understanding. Neither could contain what I had witnessed. The psychological toll was immediate. Sleep became a precarious negotiation between exhaustion and dread. Each night, I relived the patient's gaze, the shadow lingering at the periphery of vision, the unnatural rhythm of their body bending in impossible ways. My dreams were fragmented, stitched together with whispers and flickering lights, each echo amplifying the unresolved terror. I began to question every case I had ever handled, revisiting MRIs, EEGs, patient notes, asking myself if there had always been shadows I had failed to notice. Moral dilemmas compounded the fear. Had I acted correctly? Had my intervention prevented harm? Or had I unwittingly invited something into that space? In the days that followed, the ward's sterile environment seemed a fragile veneer. The faint smell of antiseptics sometimes carried a metallic undercurrent. The hum of machinery occasionally warped into imperceptible patterns. I caught glimpses of shadows that could have been ordinary objects, but my instincts told me otherwise. I realized that the patient's presence had left a residue, not physical, but perceptual, psychological, almost sentient. The boundary between what was real and what lingered in my mind blurred. I returned to my routines, scanning charts, reviewing EEG tracings, consulting colleagues. all the while aware of a subtle, unplaceable tension. Something had shifted in my perception. My hand sometimes shook when adjusting electrodes. My own reflection in the monitor's glare occasionally felt unfamiliar, a reminder that exposure to the incomprehensible leaves marks deeper than memory. I found myself questioning neurological phenomena I had once understood, wondering if some anomalies had always been inexplicable, waiting for someone to notice. Despite the ward's outward calm, I felt the presence in quiet moments. A flicker in the corner of my eye, a draft where none should exist, a whisper beneath the threshold of hearing. I couldn't fully leave it behind. Even outside the hospital, in the mundane spaces of my home or the streets I walked at night, I sensed something watching, waiting. The professional duty that had bound me to the patient remained, tangled now with unease and fear. It was a reminder that the veil between science and the unknowable had been breached. I told no one the full extent of what occurred. To do so would risk ridicule, disbelief, and perhaps even my career. Yet the silence was a burden, heavy and unyielding. I ponder whether some knowledge is dangerous precisely because it cannot be contained. Could neurologists truly comprehend phenomena that defy all understanding? Or had my curiosity, my insistence on explanation, invited a fragment of the incomprehensible into my life? The patient stabilized in ways my instruments could confirm. Yet I could not shake the sensation that what I had witnessed was not confined to a single moment or room. The air seemed charged with subtle tension, shadows that were slightly too long, whispers too faint to locate. Something remained in the space, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to forget, but I could not. As I left the ward that night, a cold draft brushed my neck, carried with the faintest hint of that metallic tang. The sensation of the gaze I had evaded all day had simply followed me home. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to bone, that the story wasn't over.